Hi dear friend, welcome in the Q&A today, and I am going to talk to you today on the basis of a question of one of my students about the Daoland healthcare program and healthcare in general, and what I want with Daoland healthcare and what I think you should want, of course. And what I hope, of course, that one day maybe you will be part of and support of an alternative for the current health care plans that are around. And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. Let me first start with a few simple truths about healthcare and Chinese medicine as a rule. Almost everywhere in the world, Chinese medicine is recognized as an additive to regular healthcare practices, whether it is surgery or whether it is general home practitioner or whether it is disease treatment. People are basically expected to do it next to regular medicine. And of course there are countries where Chinese medicine is recognized, but still it is recognized usually on the foundation of a person also being a medical doctor. And statistically, there have been some researchers that show that medical doctors usually are not the most reliable therapists with things like acupuncture. Herbal medicine also in itself, it is a science which is very complicated. It takes a long time of study, and people have modernized herbal medicine in many countries, and as a result of that, people practice herbal medicine on the basis of Western chemistry, which is very often diametrically opposed to the principles of Chinese medicine. So that means that people give a definition of what a herb does, like an anti-infectant or diuretic or something like this, which is not present in Chinese medicine theory. Western medicine as a healthcare is that it is intertwined with the industry of chemistry, the industry of hospitals, the stock market, and well, a whole range of other money-consuming organizations and institutes. In itself, there is nothing wrong with any of these things. Everybody needs to have a living, and we live in a money-based economy, so we can't really avoid it. For that purpose, I refer to you to my series on Patreon on economics, and there's also going to be one movie about non-monetary economies. When we look at the healthcare, you see that medicine in itself, from the period of Paracelsus, Hieronymus Bombastus Paracelsus, he came with the idea based on Christian values that, or partly naturalist values, that nature is alive because of the work of sort of a small sprites or spirits, and he called them natural elements, and these natural elements are present in all kind of things, and because of this presence they make sure that trees grow, and if you break a branch, that the branch is going to repair itself, or if you cut yourself, the wounds in your finger are going to be repaired in the same kind of fashion. He was relatively popular, I guess, because he had followers, and from his students in the next generation or a few generations later, they came into conflict with his original theory, because he said for medicine you need pure substances, and these were the 5 elements as he proposed them, which is the 4 elements of grease and ether as a 5th element, and these elements had to be pure to have a particular kind of effect. What happened in his descendants, his disciples, you can say, is that at a certain point they said, but impurities also can have a healing effect, and the impurities Paracelsus is seen as something from the devil, from the evil side of nature, and you have to understand Christianity is primarily manichaeistic in the sense that it sees things as a dark and light, and as a good and evil, and a struggle between these two things. And you can see him in that light. But his students, they were a little bit more nuanced, and they said like, okay, impurities, they are also curable agents, and as a result of that, we can build all kind of medicines by mixing and admixing all kind of chemistry. This continued, of course, until we now have our current form of medication, which is, well, an origin also, of course, based in nature, but mostly produced in the form of chemical industry in big vats or whatever kind of things they use to make that. I'm not a specialist in that kind of production methods, so I'm not going to make too many remarks about it to not look too stupid about it. But the costs of these kind of things are very big. The development and research also is very expensive, and the testing of these medicines takes a long time. You see this now with COVID and the making of a vaccine. The vaccine is, of course, an industrial process to produce it. In the time that the vaccine is produced, the virus is mutated, so the vaccine is not going to be effective enough. And there's also different strains of the virus. So the workability of a vaccine is going to be limited. And there's other factors which also play a role in that process. And that's the disadvantage of chemistry, of course. It always runs a little bit behind the facts, and it is also why people very often they try to look at old medications to see if they're also usable in new problems. For instance, there are particular kind of medications which are meant to relax the bladder, and they are also used in as an antidepressant. And there are medications like, for instance, Prozac, which is used for particular kind of psychological problems, but it is also used for particular kind of physiological problems nowadays. So in that sense, there is already quite a big looking back at the past taking place to see if they can help. These medicines, the old medicines, can help because of the prices of the new medicines. Hi Dimitri. Hi Marcelo. Hi Honore. When we look at this whole industrial procedure of healthcare, you see that also the clients, because there are many clients, they are seen as a commodity. And as a result of that, you get processed in the process of healthcare, and you go to your doctor, then they go do all kind of researches, and all these kind of things take a lot of time. In the meantime, your medical problem escalates so that the costs of actual treatment, if there is going to be an actual treatment, is going to be even more high, or the amount of suffering that you go through because there's no actual treatment in many cases, in the beginning stage anyway. Your suffering is escalating until it comes to a point where they say, oh, but we have a medicine for that. So that is a little bit of a disadvantage of modern healthcare. And it also is a little bit, well, I don't know if you have ever read Michel Foucault, The Birth of a Clinic, and he talks basically about how Western medicine became a sort of an authority over the physical and psychological body of the modern person. And as a result of that, you as a person, you put your authority in the hands of your therapist, basically. And as a result of that, you give away a freedom. In the same way, in healthcare laws all over the world, you see that because of disasters, natural disasters, or plagues, or epidemics, or something like this, your democratic rights, if you have them, can be suspended. For the simple reason that the healthcare of all the people goes before the economic and the personal freedoms that people have. So all the people who are protesting these kind of things, this is the basic laws of every country almost, and it's already for a long time. And I have somewhere in one of the texts in a dietary course that I give, I extensively talk about that, because it is an important issue when you study medicine and herbal medicine, or you study any form of medicine, or you have to deal with tangible substances that you give to a person. And I will get to that in a moment, Marcelo. And you see that in Western herbal medicine, people very often, they use similar kind of format as regular medicine. They look at the chemical constituents of the herbs, and as a result of that, they also, how do you say, judge things like ad hoc, you can say. And what you mentioned about the use of cannabis to treat PTSD, in general, if you have psychological problems, they become worse from any form of drugs. So in the case of psychological trauma and even physical trauma, the stress that is inside your body can feel released temporarily, but the problem with all kind of drugs is that it also creates a sort of debt in your future, and as a result of that, you don't really resolve problems, but you actually put them forward to another time. And I've been treating a lot of people who have long-standing problems with cannabis use, and what you see every time when they stop using cannabis, that they start developing all kind of emotional issues, because in the time that they were using cannabis on a frequent basis, they did not address any of the psychological issues. And so in that sense, from a Chinese medicine perspective, I'm not a big fan. So Marcelo, I'm sorry if I disappoint you with that. I have been a user in the past, and I know how pleasurable it is, but it is not very useful. And it is with almost everything that is psychoactive, and that is basically also a Taoist view, even though there are Taoist rituals in which also drugs can be used sometimes, or medicines for particular kind of diseases. But that is it. Yeah, for instance, if you use magnetite, powder of that, cook in water, works very good against certain kinds of epileptic attacks. And don't talk to me about ayahuasca. That will be another story for a long time. It is the same. Ayahuasca is maybe even worse than cannabis. It keeps you in a continuous drugged state, which takes a long time to get out of your blood. And that is in itself is unhealthy, because you're not a free person, and anybody who is not a free agent in that sense, because of medication or drugs, is in a disadvantage in the development of its life. That is the Chinese medicine perspective. That's very simple, and it's a Taoist perspective actually too. But to go back with my story, thank you for the remark, by the way, Marcelo. It's actually a very good remark, because I get that question very often, and it's difficult always to ask or to answer that question. But to go back to the healthcare problem, the healthcare problem is because it is an industry, and it is very much ad hoc. As a result of that, it is difficult to to find resolution for your problems. And you see that people very often are being dragged to the healthcare system all their lives, and they do not really improve, but they do gradually escalate in their problems. And as a result of that, problems become gradually worse. I don't say that Western medicine or chemical medicine or industrial medicine will not be able to solve problems for people, but I think the healthcare system is systematic in not really treating things. This is my observation from the people that I, of course, get to see in my clinic, and as a result of that, it is difficult to build that kind of trust in the healthcare. Of course, people are being helped by it, because some people, their problems maybe are suitable for that kind of system, but not everybody is about that. So, Dimitri, that's a very good question actually about valerian root and St. John's wort and stuff. In Chinese medicine, they basically say everything you put into your mouth, including your words, that's all poison. It's very ironic, because that means that everything you put in your mouth, what we consider in the Western esoterics, like it's natural, so it's healthy, is not true. There's a lot of things that can be very damaging. Like, for instance, deer antler is a nice example. It can give you brain hemorrhage. in the same way, valerian root can make you too dampy on the inside, through which you actually develop depression. So valerian root can be relaxing when you're very stressed, but it can also be the wrong solution for the kind of stress that you have. So it always takes some study to understand what herb you need to take, and it is not an easy thing. But of course, it should be but then we come to that in a Daoland healthcare discussion. But it should be standard in every primary school and every high school, that people get classes in healthcare and how to deal with herbs and how to deal with medicines and how to deal with a disease and so on, so that they develop the tools that can help them through life without having to rely on medical industry. That's definitely the case, Dimitri. It's definitely good to be mindful of the poisonous nature of things. It is very difficult. We look also on TV and on internet. We look at a lot of things which are actually poisons to us, and we listen to music which are actually poisons to us. And it's very hard to admit that to myself sometimes. I used to live to very loud punk music and all kind of other weird experimental things and things that I did. And that is not the best education for your health, all these kind of things. And practice in itself is good for your health, but you have to have the right practice. So it is not just practice, it has to be practice combined with study. But then we get now actually to what this talk is going to be about, I think. Because the question that my student had was basically about, I already studied with you now for some year, and I do understand that you pay all the time attention to the Daoland program, but how do I actually make sense of the Daoland program in such a way that I can explain it to other people, because it is a difficult issue, and how do I apply it? And I will have to tell you about the structure of the education, because education is of course the root of every form of healthcare. And at the moment, when you are studying with a program as the Daoland program, is you start, most people start anyway, with just regular practice, weekly practice or something like this, or monthly practice, to work on their own health. And then they combine that with getting themselves informed through the different posts and articles and so on, and questions, like in this session, to get answers about specifics on their health. Or maybe they come for individual consultation, or through Zoom or Skype or something like this, they do a consultation through which we can develop together an insight in what they need for their health and how their practice should be adjusted. But the thing is that once you start studying, the program is adjusted to such a way that you start practicing things by yourself, and that you also start sharing these with other people, so that you can use the people around you as a sort of a petri dish. You will see what is going to happen in the people around you, and you learn to observe in the program through the different meditations that I also teach in the program. And as a result of that, together with the theory that you're supposed to study also, you start to develop an understanding over time during the study about why people react in this way, and you learn the right kind of language and what things mean, so that you understand the Chinese medicine theory at work, right? Because that's the main thing. You need to understand Chinese medicine theory at work. When it remains bookish, it becomes mechanical. In the same way, when you only study acupuncture or you only study Qigong, you cannot say you do a holist practice. You actually do a practice. And holist practice requires that you do everything as much as possible. So you have to develop yourself in many different levels at the same time. Based on the same holist practice, when you look at the physical practices, you see that the body has particular kind of needs, and these particular kind of needs, they are different for everybody. And that means that everybody has a unique need. In an ideal circumstance, sorry, something went wrong here with the screen. The movie is difficult to play here on the Facebook. Well, maybe that's okay, as long as the questions are visible. I have to maybe restart this page. Yeah, so they can follow your questions when they are here. Yeah, there it is again. At the moment when you look at yourself, you have to do things about the speed of your movement, your balance, your strength, your breathing, your coherence, uh, the way how your joints are relating to your muscles, and all kind of other things. And the fact is that in Taoism they have all kind of practices for these things, but normally in the past in a monastery you would learn these things over a period of say 20 years. When you are following your teacher, and he would send you here, and he would send you there, and he would send you there, and your basic practice, what you need for your self-cultivation to become an immortal, will be those. Like every now and then you would get something that relates to that, and it would be told. But all the other things were necessary because they were necessary to fine-tune the needs of your body. Like for instance, now at this moment you need to balance your mind. Now at this moment you need to cool down. Now at this moment you need to heat up. Now at this moment you need to relax. Now at this moment you need to tense, and so on and so forth. So that process, understanding of the changing needs in your life, these kind of things are part of a holist view. And the ideal healthcare then of course is a center where you can follow all kind of classes, or like nowadays on the Patreon online you can follow all kind of classes, or you can follow instructor courses to learn it for yourself, or to share that with people in your environment or your class system that you already have, so that you can have a more comprehensive view about what healthcare needs. What I did with the fast tracks within the Daoland program was actually based on a question that I had when I was speaking in Mexico, and I got to meet with Atomi and Aztec leaders, and we talked about their needs for healthcare and medicine, and to have people understand their culture. And what is the problem about it? And I'm a transculturalist, as I very often say. So I devised on their request, and also on the request of people in China that I was working with, and my experience with Aboriginals from Australia and Native Americans from North America, I devised a way of learning by comparing different cultures and different meanings, so that the differentiation and the differences between cultures become self-evident, and as a result of that a culture can profile itself better in respect to another culture, and they can do it themselves, right? So they don't need to rely on amateurs, like many spiritual inclined people are basically amateur researchers. I'm sorry to say that. We all are amateurs, of course, in many ways, and we remain that even when we are independent or organized researchers. And so there's always parts where you have a blind spot, and that is very important to accept that for yourself, that you learn to relativize your understandings, and especially your understanding of the language of things. And at the moment when I developed that, the idea was that then through this method people could develop their tools and be self-explanatory and compare themselves with other cultures to make people understand why they are different and what is very specific and what is unique about their culture, which is not present in another culture. For instance, yes, that's right, Dimitri. The beginning is usually the most fun part of a journey, because then you don't know anything yet. And the problem is you need to know a lot of things, and then you can sometimes be a little bit, disappointed in yourself. Because especially in the beginning, when you start practicing physically, you start noticing all your limitations. And it's mentally, of course, also because some people cannot even read a page of a book without falling asleep. But to come back to these things, so then at that moment they can self-explain themselves. And of course, for me, healthcare was my primary idea, because, for instance, I think healthcare is the prime concern of every society. That means that a society that doesn't take care of its health in itself is a barbaric society. And then I'm not meaning barbaric in the sense like strangers, but really in the sense of Mad Max kind of thing, right? Because nobody really seems to care about other people then. And this kind of non-altruistic societies is beyond my understanding. So the idea of these programs is that every society has methods from old time onward to now to deal with all kind of diseases and problems, whether it's through herbs or through exercise or through counseling or through ritual or through meditation. It doesn't really matter. All these kind of methods, they all are relevant. They all can play a role within a local healthcare. And I'm of course specialized in Chinese medicine and Taoist medicine. So I developed the Daoland program on the basis of that program to serve people. And these lectures, these sessions that I do now, also are part of that program. And the classes that I give on the Wednesdays also are part of that program, because it has to be a free service so that people can ask questions and get to know about healthcare and theory and so on, which is suitable for daily use. But then, of course, once you are learning these kind of things, then you're only a practitioner. But disease and health are layered, and you can say when you are alive, suppose you are alive, and I hope you are, then at that moment you have here being very much alive, and that means that you're an immortal, and the other side you are dead, right? So your whole life oscillates between being an immortal and being dead. And the thing is that when you're born, you tend towards that because of the entropic nature of life. So the exercises, they have as a purpose not to make you strong or anything like that, but to move you away from death, right? So they have to move you towards immortality. That's the whole point of healthcare. Healthcare has to help you move towards immortality, because being more immortal means also meaning less inclined to die. When you are less inclined to die, that means you're also less susceptible to disease. That's the basic Taoist thought behind these kind of things. The moment when you go further than that and your problems are a little bit too big, then exercise cannot work. And in Chinese medicine they say, well, if exercise doesn't work, usually massage will work. And massage is to help you shake loose or calm your emotions, depending with mobilization, like in Tuina, or in or more oily kind of massage, or a rubbing massage or something like this, like in Amo. And both are part of a physiotherapeutic approach to health, in the sense that they combine imitations of movements and their own movements and the intervention in the way of you working of the muscles, the skin and the bones and the joints and so on to improve health. When you have something broken, of course the bones have to be set, and then all the surrounding trauma has to be treated too, and very often massage is enough. When the massage is not enough, then that is very often because the problem is bigger than that. But if you are a masseur, but you have no experience in Chinese healthcare theory, and you don't have experience in Chinese exercise practice, then the massage actually is always going to be insufficient to a degree, because it remains very topological, if you can say. Even though in book terms it might be a holist, but in reality it is actually not holist at all. It is just symptomatic what you are doing at that moment. So you see that the skill of being a good masseur is based on being a good practitioner, right? And a good practitioner you become by becoming very well versed in understanding the theory. So that means it is not just a physical practice, it is also a mental practice. And for that, many people, this is going too far. They like to do the mental practice and then become a practitioner and make a lot of money, buy a Mercedes or something like this. But the whole point of Chinese medicine is that you do not care about money, but that you do care about health. That is what it says in the Huang Jing first chapter. You don't teach anybody who has money in their eyes, because at the moment when they want to do it for money, then at that moment they will not take the interest of the client at heart. They will take their own interest at heart. So that is why healthcare always should be free, and people who are working in healthcare should not make too much money. That is just should be a basic rule. They should have sufficient, but they should not have more than say a gardener or something like this. It sounds communist when I say that, but it is not meant to be like that. It is just meant that their dedication to the clients should be the prime concern. And when you see that not working and massage is not going to be sufficient, then acupuncture is the means to take. And acupuncture goes deeper into the body in some ways, addresses things in another way, because it can reach all the way into the organ. So through different means of needle therapy, with a few needles you can achieve already great things in somebody's health. But when that is not enough, then that means that the problems that somebody has are so big that the poisoning by herbs or by medication doesn't matter so much anymore. So then at that moment, herbs is like a last resort. Way before all these things, it doesn't mean that there's no herbs involved in the way of doing things. But as a person, you should have learned on the primary school and on the high school how you should eat. And all Chinese medicine books from the past, they talked primarily about food. They didn't talk about herbs. And they talked about food and which herbs should be added to it to have this effect, to have that effect. And whether it would be fish or meat or herbs or tree roots or leaves or fruits or poop of something, all these kind of things, the sweat of donkeys, then all these kind of things, they could contribute to your health. I mean, it takes a long study, and that is why every person from primary school onward should start learning about these things. This is why, for instance, I go with my children when I walk through plants, and I say, like, this you can eat, this you cannot eat, this is poisonous, this is good for your health, you can eat this and it will have that effect. This, like, for instance, you have an oak tree in the spring, the leaves, when you pull them, you can cook them in the spring, and you can cook them like spinach. They are actually quite delicious. But if you dry them, then later on in the year, like in the autumn, when people start having throat problems, they help soften up your throat problems if you make tea out of it. So many things, they have all kind of support as part of your diet, and diet is usually food and drink, right? But at the moment when you really need medication, you need heavy medication, and at that moment you start thinking about, okay, so the poisonous effect of your plants and so on is going to be worse. But in a study program, you can see that, okay, you go in your study program through stages. And at the moment when somebody is in a stage where they need herbs, they basically are already so sick that practice is not going to do it anymore. They're going to have some benefit from practice to distribute the herbs properly. But it also will take a long time before they can get any health benefits, real health benefits from practice, because it takes a long time to condition the body to react to the action of practice in a medical sense. Okay, Marcelo, have a good time in work, and thank you for watching later. I look forward to see you again. Thank you for your questions. This is basically part of the issues at hand with the Daoland healthcare. So the Daoland healthcare includes all these things in a holist view, and you have to learn this holist view in your studies so that you can apply them. And it means that you have to be able to work on all these levels at the same time. And I personally, I don't pay too much attention to herbal medicine because my clinic is not suitable to receive clients for very severe problems. Then you really need a sort of a hospital, and we're working preparing a sort of healthcare clinic for that. And I hope to find, I have enough support to set it up, but the financing of this, certainly in this corona time, is of course very difficult. But that means that people can live inside the clinic for a long time to get the proper health care when their life is debilitated because of their diseases, whether it's mental disease or whether it's physical disease. When you look at it this way and you get a real holist vision, you also can look at a person not only in the physical qualities and what they exemplify, but also what it implies in their life, and so on and so on. So you see that there's also a strong psychological component in Chinese medicine. And in effect, you can say that all Chinese medicine primarily is education. And at the moment when you realize that, then you see where the holist component comes from. Because it's not just a matter of looking at the body and say, like, oh, you need massage, you need acupuncture, or a combination of these things, and then we can solve your problems, because that's still mechanics. But it is also having to place it into somebody's life. And it doesn't mean that you go to psychotherapy and you go in digging into all the emotions of a person, but you try to educate people the proper kind of behaviors. In Confucianism, they said, well, you just have to follow the rites, and you have to follow the behavioral advices from the Book of Rites, because maybe in the beginning you don't understand, but after some time you see that you avoid a lot of problems because of having the right kind of behavior. like for instance the questions about drugs. Drugs, when you are managing to control yourself, yeah, sure, they can be fun as an entertainment value, but the damage that they do at the same time on the mental level and sometimes on the level of morality with people, that can be very devastating, because what you see, even from drinking coffee, eating sugar, or working too hard, go to the gym, and so on and so on, you have a sort of mental corruption towards the self-preservation of your life. So that means that you are going to take less care about your body, because the sensation of things very often overtakes your rational awareness of all kinds of things. And rationality and morality, they are very much intertwined according to Taoism. If you are not moral, you can't be rational. That's basically what they say. And that is, for Chinese medicine reasoning, that's a very important point, because Chinese medicine takes morality at its root and observation of all kind of problems, and they say there is always a moral issue also in somebody as a result of the disease or as the cause of the disease. And to be quite frank, if I look at my own life, I can see where I made wrong choices, and that's the morality part. And I can see how they influenced me in my life, so why not in somebody else's life? It is probably the same, so I can accept that. I see that in my clients and in my students also, that we very often make choices on the basis of self-importance. Yeah, so we're not modest at that point. What I noticed by turning these things around and by taking a more service-oriented attitude and making my own opinions less important, but making the opinions of my profession more important, then at that moment actually I became happier. Yeah, so my own ideas were not that important anymore, so they didn't have to be heard all the time. I just had to answer the questions when somebody asked a question like, oh, Chinese medicine, that is the idea of Chinese medicine, that's the idea of Taoist medicine. And as a result of that, you do people much more benefit, because you don't interfere with your own resonance or noise inside your head. So when you look at the Daoland program as a healthcare system, you can see that we live in communities, and certainly when you are a therapist, or when you are an instructor, or when you are a teacher, and you have to understand the difference between all these kind of things, then at that moment you see that you actually build a sort of community around you, and the education of this community is a very important part of your success. And at the moment when that is not part of your basic training, then that part is going to miss. You might be a very good therapist. I don't want to say anything about people not being good therapists when they're not doing holistic work. But the nature of Taoist and Chinese medicine before all the modernizations was primarily as a holist idea, was based on the idea that you should look at all these different aspects, because you're not treating a disease, you're treating a human. So that is a very important difference in Western medicine, because in Western medicine and the healthcare that belongs to it, you mechanically intervene in the mechanics of a system, and it works or it doesn't work. And in Chinese medicine, period, you treat a person. And all the different things that are happening to a person, whether you call them demonic or evil, or you call them anything else, or you call them pathogenics, or you call them chemical or anything like that, they all are subservient to the treatment of the person. And I think that is the most beautiful thing about Chinese and Taoist medicine and the Daoland healthcare program. I try to make that reflect that idea of holism as treatment of a person that is specific for Chinese medicine culture. But when you go to Tibetan culture, or when you go to Japanese culture, or when you go to Aztec culture, or you go to Hopi culture, or you go to Asante culture in Africa, or the Aboriginal culture in Australia or on the Philippines, all these kind of peoples, they have developed their own culture, and even though there's mutual influences between different peoples all over the world, there are specific, unique things which are not really clearly, how do you say, boundaried between different cultures, because there's like this overlap between cultures usually, but enough to show what is important. Like for instance, there's no concept for chi in Western culture, so there's no word to replace it. When you replace it with a word in a Western language, then at that moment you basically make it something else. So that is why it is important to think in a comparative way, and it is also why it is important to understand what kind of holism Chinese medicine is actually about. And then as a practitioner, you have to do all these things at the same time. It is a bit of a pity if you don't, in that sense. And you do disservice to yourself and to your work, I believe, of course, but that's my radical opinion, or average radical then, about what people ought to do. Like for instance, as part of your development as a healthcare professional, you have to learn how to drink tea. And today our friend Chen Ling is not here. She's a tea lady, tea professional. And when I see her work with tea, then I can say like, okay, there is like a social service, a community service in that tea thing, because tea is not a thing that you do alone. It is the thing that you do together. And at the moment when you do it alone, you do it in preparation for doing it together. That's basically it. When you practice usually alone, but you also practice in a group, because in that group you learn new things and you get inspired by what you see and feel and experience from other people. When you go sit or stand in a particular kind of order, like in a circle or in nice lines or chaotic, all these kind of things give a different experience. For Taoists, standing in nice lines is something that is good to have a lot of people in your court to practice, but it is not good for the personal development of a person. It is good for business, right? This is what Zen Chan Buddhism actually discovered quite early, when it became very popular and it didn't have enough space, so it put everybody in neat lines and it started beating people up to check their body posture, because everybody needs a lot of attention from their teacher when they really want to develop. Nobody develops by themselves that easily in the right way, even though they develop themselves. And sometimes things go right, but sometimes things go wrong. All right, so thank you for all your questions. I hope this was actually satisfying. I'm already talking for 45 minutes, and I think that's long enough to have to listen to my voice. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Perhaps you even decide to become a patron and to support this program for a few bucks every month. You can support this program and make sure it continues all the time. You can become a student, you can be a participant, and you can even become an instructor in the Daoland program online and in your neighborhood, or you can become a therapist. We are starting very soon with a new program. I think September. Oh, this is already September. This month we should start with a new program for acupuncture studies, and I think maybe the first 2 classes I will do online, so that you can still decide to participate. I will make them open online, that is, and I will help them being promoted through these weekly classes, so that you can decide to study like that, because they give a good outline about what the study is all about. I look forward to see you next time, and if you have any more questions, then put them into my messenger or something like this. It's always nice to have talks with people about all kinds of subjects that are keeping them busy and awake at night. At Wednesday there's a practice class. If you can come, it will be really nice. And otherwise, I hope you make the right choices for your health and make progress. Thank you very much.
Is een beetje. Stop, ding. Wow.